what do you think are the best and the worst case scenarios for our future associated with artificial intelligence?
I think it's an impossible thing to predict. It's an impossible thing to map. Given those conditions, the best thing we can do, in my estimation, is to immerse ourselves in this tapestry of intelligence. And so, again, this is my project blueprint. I built an algorithm that takes care of me better than I can take care of myself. And the algorithm is measurement to science to protocol. I have willfully given the care of me over to an algorithm. And it serves my interests better than I can serve my own interests. And so there's this discussion. Oftentimes we hear about this idea of goal alignment. You know, like the AIs are going to turn us all into paper clips or something like that. Now, that is not discounting that argument, but the idea that goal alignment between humans and machines, we don't even have goal alignment within self, let alone between all of humanity. And to me, it's kind of an absurd proposition that we'd bucket and say AI has one set of interests and alignment and humans have another. You really, to me, to start that proposition, if we're trying to brick by brick build this thing up, I really care to build goal alignment within me first. And the first thing I need to know is I do not represent my own best interests. I do things which self-sabotage. I do things which accelerate my aging and the onset of disease and make myself miserable, feeling, terrible after certain things. Now, I can spin up dozens of stories for you and tell you why that's a beautiful life and that's how I find meaning and how if I can't do those things, then it's not worth existing. But the plain truth is, in a previous form of Bryan, he did more self-sabotage in the system than I truly want. And so this is like the kind of reflection I think we need to have is honestly admitting, each of us, that we are incapable of truly acting in our best interests all the time. We do things that which not, and again, everyone's got a colorful and fancy story on why they do it. It's just cover up.
When did that change happen to you of saying, okay, like the Bryan that I'm living as is not the Bryan that I want to live in as the future? And how do you suggest people come to that realization themselves of, oh, wow, I'm actually living a life that is harmful to me?
It was 10 years ago, maybe like 8 to 10 years ago. I was in a pretty bad spot where I had chronic depression for a decade. I was in a bad, struggling relationship. I was leaving the religion I was born into. I just sold Braintree, so I had all this newfound wealth and like complications and whatever with it. And I was 60 pounds heavier than I am now. And the stresses of and building Braintree, all the same. So like the stresses of life would come crashing down on me every night at 7 p.m. In the morning, I'd be great. I'd exercise in the morning, do well all day. Then 7 p.m., all the stresses would just be like a ton of bricks. And I would address my overwhelm and stress by overeating. I would try to bury my stress with food. And I was absolutely helpless to try to fix it. I mean, I tried everything. I would tell myself all day long, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. And that moment came and like, oh, but just tonight, tomorrow you can start. And like, we all know the excuses. And I was helpless to stop myself. And so one night I just playfully said, evening Bryan is fired. 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Bryan, he's fired. He has no authority to eat food. under any circumstance. And it led me to this idea that, it was just in jest that I did it, because I was like, like I'm gonna drive myself mad, like I'm gonna die, like the kids are not gonna have a father because I'm gonna die of a heart attack. And that led to me to this idea that there was this possibility of dealing with my mind in a systematic way and keeping its powers in check and elevating other parts of self. And that's what I've been building since.
And then how do you recommend people come to that same realization themselves?
I mean, everyone has I guess I call it a power law of good behavior. When I identify Evening Bryan, I'd say 95% of people instantaneously identify their version of Evening Bryan. They all know it, right? And whether it's like the goldfish person or whether it's the alcohol person or like whatever it is, they all have their vices and they all know exactly what I'm talking about. And so there's a power law of bad behavior. People typically have one or two things which they just can't stop, which then creates a cascade event where a bunch of other bad things happen because of it. Like once you've messed up doing one thing, it's like, why not everything? And so the best thing is to identify that version of yourself and create a clearly identified profile. Like this version of me appears under these circumstances. They have these kinds of arguments. They present this kinds of rationale, and they do these kinds of behaviors. And after they do these things, the rest of us, like morning Bryan, afternoon Bryan, dad Bryan, look in the mirror Bryan, like the hundreds of versions of other Bryans, we all hate Evening Bryan because he ruins our life. And so then once you understand that, and then when that character emerges, it's like, okay, you're Evening Bryan, and I know who you are, and I know the arguments you make, and I know the kind of behaviors you do, and you ruin everything for all of us. And then when you say no to Evening Bryan, like punches holes in the wall and falls on the floor and throws a tantrum and kicks and screams and threatens everybody. He's totally out of control, but he has to be, arrested. And so I would suggest that people try to identify this version of themselves, which then creates the cascade of everything else. And if they can get that one success under the belt, they can do other versions. So I've done this with other versions of myself now too, and I've slowly tried to chip away at it. But I have found that the less room I give my mind to move about, the better off I am.